Okay, so how's everyone today? We good? We're good. You know, we were in Edinburgh yesterday, and I swear you guys look more enthusiastic than what the Edinburgh guys. Is that true? Like, are people more enthusiastic here? Because I think it is. Today we're going to be talking about web diagnostics, okay, specifically using Glimpse, and we're going into the whys and wherefores with that. And it's interesting, you know, I don't know if you guys know, but I haven't been to Scotland, and I don't know why you would actually know whether I've been to Scotland or not before. But anyway, so I was thinking about it, and I had these various images in my head before coming to Scotland of what I expected to see, and you know, what I expected to do, and you know, all these sorts of things. And then when I actually got here, it was interesting. I found something a little bit different. I made some great discoveries. Okay, and these were fabulous. Okay, so I don't know about you guys. I really enjoy Scotch, but then I also found these guys, and that was like, I wonder what that's all about. But and before I forget, I also found out about the hairy coos. Okay, and they're really cool. I like them. I haven't seen too many like in fields over there, but they're in postcards everywhere.
Okay,
where do you need to go to find them in like the wild? Or in the fields? It's like further north?
That direction.
That direction. Okay, cool. We might need to do a trip that way. Okay, so if I say we're going on a field trip later on, we're going to see the hairy coos. Okay? So, let Jude. My name is Anthony. Okay, as you might be able to tell from my accent, I'm not from around here. I'm currently living in New York. I'm actually from Australia. Okay? Now, if you have any questions, feel free to hit me up on Twitter as we're going along, or posts, or whatever else, and we can get those answered. Or we can ask questions at the end. So as I was saying, I'm from Australia, and I get a lot of people who go, well, that's not that far away. Okay, and I'm like, well, we're not the ones with the mountains or the spandex, okay? We're actually the one with Mick Dundee, okay, and drop bears. Okay, so don't ever go into the wild with those guys. You'll know about those. So if you ever see these guys, they're really vicious. Okay, and you can always look up, you know, Australia in Google if you want to, and you know, find out all interesting things about Australians. Okay, so good on doing that. Okay, so our objective today, okay, is to make you awesome. Okay, and we're going to do that by actually having a look at what tools and stuff are available for debugging and diagnostics. Okay? And specifically, we're going to be having a look at debugging for the web, okay, because debugging in general is a pretty big topic, and we're going to narrow in on the web. And let's actually take a quick look at Glimpse at this stage, because I think that'll actually help us. Oops, wrong thing. PC. That'll actually help set some context for what we're actually looking at. So here we have a test website. Has anyone ever heard of NBC Music Store before? Yeah, okay, a few people. John Galloway built this. Basically, pretty vanilla website. You can go around, view different albums. You can click on an album, you know, get its details. Now, this website has already got Glimpse installed. Okay, you might be able to see it down the bottom corner here. And what we can do is, once it's installed, we can actually click on it, and we actually get this bar or panel that shows up at the bottom of the page. Okay, giving us a whole bunch of information. So it kind of looks and feels a bit like Chrome Developer Tools or Firebug. You know, anyone used any of those before? Okay, except what we're actually doing is rendering these in-page. Okay? So it's actually a part of your website. It gets kind of freaky when, you know, using Glimpse to diagnose your website. But then when we're developing Glimpse, I can't actually do it on this one. But like if you were using Chrome, and I'll show you later, you can actually use the F12 tools to debug Glimpse, which debugs your website. And it's like, that gets a bit of a mind blow. But anyway, so what we can actually see here is we're seeing information as it is on the server. Okay, so if we have a look here, we're looking at the web config that's actually set up on the server and being used by the server. We can see the environment we're running in. We'll actually go through a lot more of these in more detail, okay, later on. But this is the kind of context that we've got. And all of this information, let's take a look at something interesting. Let's take execution. Actually changes on a per request basis, okay, depending on what we're actually doing and where we actually go. Okay, so it can sit there following us along as we're doing different bits and pieces. Does this kind of make sense? Does it ring true to how you'd think about, you know, what we're trying to do with the tool? Yeah? Okay. So I've had a quick look, and we're going to get into this. And essentially, debugging is MD diagnostics is one of the hardest things that we do. Does anyone kind of disagree with that? You know, because this guy, you know, Brian, agrees with me, and he said debugging is twice as hard as writing the code in the first place. Therefore, if you write your code as cleverly as you possibly can, you are therefore, by definition, not smart enough to debug it. Okay? Has anyone ever felt this way before? I know I do. Okay? And it's like, what's going on? Okay? And this is a problem because, you know, when they look at this stuff, 40 to 60% of our time is actually spent debugging. Okay? And this is a bit of an issue because we have this context switch between being creative, okay, and having to switch into debugging. And I know my mum, when she says, what do you do? I'm like, I'm an artist, you know, I create things and all this sort of stuff, and she calls bullshit on me. But, you know, this is a huge problem when we do this switch. And so, the other thing that comes up is the fact that the web isn't simple. Okay, I'm not saying like, you know, WPF applications or whatever else are simple, okay, but the web is particularly complex, okay, with all the different interactions between different components and different applications and services and all these different things. So trying to get your head around how those are actually operating is an issue. So if we take a look at the current approach to how these things work, we kind of get this. One of the realizations that you kind of make pretty early on is that at its core, debugging diagnostics hasn't really changed for the last 20 years. Fundamentally, the same tools we had back then are the same ones we have today. Okay, so we've got log breakpoints, log files, kind of static analysis. These are the sorts of tools that we need to fall back on and rely on. So, you know, it occurred to me and Nick, you know, when we were sitting down on a subway platform one day in New York, that, you know, this is kind of a bit of a problem. Okay, because we were sitting around trying to educate people at the consultancy that we were working at the time, and we're like, well, how are you supposed to convey to someone, you know, how MVC routes work, you know, or how Web API works, or something, some of those deeper concepts within those, when you can't actually see it. Okay, and so when we look at the tools that we have, and we're trying to understand what are some of the problems that we have, the majority of them come down to the fact that the current tools are too low level. Okay. And they're very blunt instruments, okay? So for instance, if I have a set of breakpoint, okay, that breakpoint is great at telling me that I is equal to 5, okay? And next time I go around the loop, I is equal to 6, fantastic, okay? But it can't tell me if the application is actually working the way that it's supposed to be working, okay? And who's ever had this scenario where you've got like breakpoints set everywhere trying to capture a scenario that, you know, sometimes I think this might happen, please hit it, something. And then it's like, how do I get rid of all these things? And, you know, the other thing that occurs to me with breakpoints is that, you know, it's a bit of a, do you know how, has anyone heard of the expression like code smell before? A bit of code smell? Like, this almost feels like a tooling smell when we have like full on, like settings panels and stuff within Visual Studio to manage our breakpoints. Okay, and don't get me wrong, breakpoints are great when you need them, but they shouldn't be the the first step we go to. Okay, and who's ever had this, where you get like your log file and it's full of useless crap, okay, and it's really hard to diagnose. And as a web developer, with the way we kind of think on a request by request semantic. Okay. And so trying to pull out the logs for an individual request in production, near impossible, okay? Not impossible, but it's not easy, okay? And the other thing that's becoming more and more of an issue is the fact that the runtime is dynamic, okay? Meaning that, like, who does MVC or has done any MVC development here? Okay, cool, so a lot of people. So do you know how you can have filters that run in the pipeline, which is basically code that can run either side of an action that is performed? Like, I challenge anyone to look at the landscape of the different types of filters you can have, so global, controller, and action filters, and tell me, you know, off the top of your head, how and when and which order those are all supposed to execute, okay? So these are actually being compiled together dynamically. And the runtime is only getting more and more complex. So we've got this, like, convention over configuration approach, which is by naming something with a postfix of controller means that automatically it gets some, you know, ephemeral capabilities that it didn't have before, okay? And so how do you know that that's supposed to be the case if someone didn't tell you before, okay? You don't. And so this is the sort of stuff we learn from experience, or maybe we can have some help with, okay, and we'll get into that. And the fact is that with the runtime getting more complicated and with convention over configuration, static analysis tools, okay, can give us some insights into what's going on. But they can't tell us what the runtime is actually going to be looking at, okay, which is the runtime that usually we're really starting to get interested in. So, when we take a look at this, one of the realizations that we have is that context is king, okay? What if our breakpoints, and this is a loose tangent, but you know, what if our breakpoints could actually give us a debugging experience specifically when it knows we're using EF, okay, or a different one when we're using MVC, okay? We use and bring together different frameworks together to build our projects, yet the tools we use on a day-to-day basis don't change or offer any different insights based on the different frameworks that we're actually using. Okay, so this is the sort of problem that we're trying to figure out how do we actually solve. Okay, so what are some important questions that we need to ask ourselves? Okay, and this is really when I kind of hinted before that when Nick and I were sitting down trying to decide this, that we were working in a consultancy at the time, and educating developers was a big part of our role. Okay. And so we're like, well, how are we supposed to tell people about these conventions and how these things work and whatever else? We're also after, like, if I could get a literal picture, okay, of how a request occurred, how would I actually do that, okay? So some of the Chrome developer tools are great for giving like a client-side view on that, you know, but nothing really for the server. But what I really want is everything end-to-end, you know, how does this all work, okay? And how do we know if these frameworks will work in the way that we expect it to? None of those tools that I showed you before can give you that insight, okay? So this is what we want. This is where we need to be going as an industry, okay? Our tools need to step up, okay, and actually give us more insights into what we're actually doing, okay? So, enter glimpse, okay? So we were kind of like, okay, let's do something about this, okay? And let's try and fix this problem. So we're like, okay, step number one, let's try and aggregate data together. So if we can get all these different bits of pieces of information from all the different frameworks that you're using, bring them all together, we should be able to show you a pretty nice picture, okay? The other thing that we wanted to do was bridge the client and the server. In my head, as a web developer, I don't think about a request as just what happens on the server, you know, or just what happens in the client. I kind of think about it as everything that happens from the point that I click the hyperlink or the button or whatever to the time that it comes back around, okay, probably to render ready or something like that, okay, to once the page is actually rendered. Then everything that happens on beyond that. Okay? Yet there's no tool that can kind of bring that picture together for me. And you know, I want insights into my frameworks. Okay? I want to know, like I said before, whether they're working the way that they're supposed to, or if I can leverage them better. Or even just more fundamentally, when they're giving me information, it's talking in the semantics of the framework that I'm actually using, like actions, you know, filters and all this sort of stuff, rather than trying to set breakpoints to get around that. So let's take a bit of a look at Glimpse and see how it's actually put together and it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. Okay, so I've got Visual Studio here, and I'm going to start the same application that I did before. Now, who's used NuGet before? Okay, so pretty much everyone. For those who haven't, NuGet is basically a package manager that Microsoft developed that makes it really easy for us to include open source projects in our applications. And so what you do is you just go off to NuGet, and we'll actually take a quick look at that. And you can have a look that the fact that Glimpse has actually got a pretty, I don't have web there. I'll show you that later when we switch, because it's a pain in the butt to switch. So we'll take a look, but Glimpse has actually got like a package ecosystem. Because how can one package have insights into Entity Framework and to, you know, ADO.NET and to MVC and to all these different frameworks? It can't, okay? So depending on the different frameworks you're using, you go off and download the different modules, okay, on top of Glimpse that help you out with those, okay? So in this case, we've got Glimpse EF, okay, we've got Glimpse MVC, and, you know, core Glimpse essentially, okay? And it can download the different dependencies that we actually need to get up and running. So once you've installed those different packages, you can start your web page, okay, and Glimpse will pop up, okay? Now, to get started, we don't necessarily profile every single request, okay? Now, we allow you to tell us when you want Glimpse to actually run for a given request. And this is part of the overhead in terms of okay, well, you know, for whatever reason you might want it to run. So we want it to make an explicit decision about how you want it to turn on. So once your website loads after you've installed Glimpse, you won't even see any pattern. Okay, now it's there because I've already got Glimpse turned on, but you normally come to this page, okay, /Glimpse AXD by default, and you can come along and see the different settings that Glimpse has, and you can go ahead and turn Glimpse on. Okay, and what this is doing behind the scenes is it just sets a cookie, okay, that says, hey, please start collecting information on these requests that I'm actually looking for. Okay, the other thing that's in place is, you know, in terms of security, and we can talk a little bit more later about security, is that by default, Glimpse will only work on localhost. Okay, so do you know how like your error pages and stuff like that, by default you can't get like stack traces and all that sort of stuff if you're looking at it remotely? Same deal here, okay? So it will only work locally. So work locally plus cookie, and you'll see the Glimpse panel show up. Now normally you'll see a lot more of your page, okay? The resolution's bumped up here so we can actually see what we're talking about. But as you can see, we've got several different tabs that we get to work with. The different tabs kind of match up to the different things that we've installed, okay? So as you can see, we've got like execution, metadata, model binding, routes, you know, and a couple other different bits and pieces. We get those because we've installed Glimpse MVC, okay? If you hadn't, those tabs would be missing. Likewise for SQL, if you hadn't installed EF or ADO or whatever else you're using, okay, that wouldn't pop up. Okay, so that's kind of the plugin ecosystem coming together. So if we start having a look at some of these different tabs, what we're looking at here is the configuration tab. Now, as I said before, this is looking at the web config, okay, of your application. So who's ever like deployed to production or even to a test site that, you know, IS or whoever won't actually give you any access to, and they've said they've done the deployment, but you're like, something's up here. I don't think you actually have, or something screwed up with the configuration file, but you can't actually go in and check. Okay, you don't have the access or whatever else. Or even you do have the access, but then you've got to RDP into the server and blah, blah, blah. So what we're doing here is we're actually pulling out probably the most important bits of the web config and actually showing you what you have. So in this case, we've got, you know, some variables turned on. We've got like a domain here. Okay, so you'd actually be able to see, okay, well, what version am I running? Okay, maybe that's an app setting that you have set. Okay, so you'd actually be able to log in and turn Glimpse on and actually see how that's set. Some of the other things that we dive into is your connection strings. Okay, so we can actually go in, pull out what connection strings you have set, and we can actually see, well, okay, there's the raw connection string that we're actually using. Again, maybe that connection string changes as a part of your build process. Something funky is happening in production, and you're trying to verify, well, did the right connection string actually go out? Okay, and we can actually break down the connection string, okay, as far as the provider is concerned, and start diving into, well, you know, given the connection string, what does the provider actually think is going to happen? So for instance, we can know that the max pool size is going to be 100, you know, all sorts of different various bits and pieces of information, okay? And so this sort of information would be typically pretty hard to get access to, okay, without doing some pretty deep diving, okay? The other thing we go into is like authentication, okay? This one's particularly uninteresting because it's forms and there's no beyond the default setup, so you see what you're seeing here. We can get into like how the role manager's set up, all this sort of different bits and pieces, the providers, custom errors, you know, HTTP modules. So who's familiar with HTTP modules? Yeah, okay. So HTTP modules are basically a way within the ASP.NET pipeline to run code at the beginning of a request and an end of the request, or a million different places in between. Okay, now they typically run in sequence, okay, but with the way you register them, they're non-deterministic, right? You can't determine the order in which they're going to run, but Glimpse can, okay, because we actually see the way that they've actually loaded up runtime, we're providing you with the list that's actually showing you the exact order in which these things are executing. And you can actually see Glimpse itself is actually in, is an HTTP module and loaded here, okay, so that's part of the magic around how Glimpse actually works. And we can also see the HTTP handlers that are set up, you know, what verbs they support, paths, and all these different bits and pieces. Okay? Deciding to dive into some interesting things. Other different bits of information that we can get into, okay, is information about the environment that we ran on. Okay? This is going to get a little bit more interesting. So I remember I was on client side once, and I was sitting down, and every second request that I made, I got different date times, okay, or different things were quirking back and forth between the request. I was like, how on earth is this happening? Okay, and it turned out we actually had a load balancer in place that was just round robining the requests. Okay, by default, it's typically, you know, again, not easy to know which one it came from. It's like you can't get it, but it's not there in your face. So here, we can actually pull out the name of the machine that you accessed, you know, the operating system, when it was last restarted. We can also dive into the web server settings, okay, and be telling you exactly what version of IIS. Maybe you're updating from IIS, you know, 6 or 7 up to a later version, and they're saying, hey, this test server is available for you to take a look at, but you can't IDP into it. Okay, here we can actually get information out about what it actually is, so we get verification of that. Likewise with .NET versions, maybe we're updating versions of .NET, making sure that's all there. We can also tell if the debugger is attached. Okay, so maybe in production you're doing some sort of remote debugging. Okay, and I've seen cases where people have left the debugger attached. Okay, that caused all sorts of headaches. And we can actually see the server of the culture of the server. Sorry, and the server is very well cultured. And so here we can actually start to see and compare, well, what was the culture of the client, okay, versus what was the culture of the server. And we've got some client in Turkey who's actually ringing up and complaining, okay, that they get an exception. Now it turns out that MVC handles the culture for the post differently to the get, okay, and that can cause all sorts of fun and games when it comes to model binding, okay, depending on what you're doing. Okay, so here we can actually verify what we're actually getting out versus what the client is actually seeing. Okay, we can tell process information, i.e. if you want to go in and kill a particular process, we can track that down to a particular process ID. We can also see time zone information. Okay, now this one's really interesting to me because one of those problems I had with the round robining was every second time I went back and forth, the times of the orders were showing up 1 hour different. Okay, and it turned out that one server had daylight savings enabled and the other one didn't. Caused all sorts of problems. Okay, and likewise we can actually come down and start seeing, well, what assemblies does my application actually depend on and what's actually loaded. Okay, so here we can actually see, for instance, I'm actually using NE Framework 4.3. So maybe you've thought you've updated to something new, okay, i.e. 6.1 or 6.2 or something like this, and you can actually come in and verify that that change is made. Now, usually that wouldn't be something you just do, or like, oh, I want to make sure it's updated. Or maybe you're seeing some weird quirks, and it's just one more thing off the checklist that you're trying to make sure, hey, look, yeah, okay, that's all okay. And we can also see the rest of the system assemblies that have loaded. So, as you can see, we're starting to get into the basic bread and butter about what made the request a success. Now, some of the other things that we can start diving into, and I probably won't get into too much detail on these things, but we can see what different server variables were set, okay, and we can also see different request information that was picked up, okay. Now, this by itself, you might be going, it's not that information, cool, you're telling me what the headers were. Well, I can pick that up with, you know, Fiddler, or I can pick that up with, you know, various F12 tools. But this is a little different, okay. This is as the server received it, okay. So there's a very much difference between the headers as they left your machine versus the headers as they were received by the server. I remember another case where we had a client and the requests were being screwed up because it turned out some proxy in the network somewhere was screwing around with the headers before they got to our server. And we were trying to figure this out. I'm setting the headers to this for this caching, and yet it's not working. Okay, and I couldn't figure out why. Okay, and it was because this proxy was playing around. So here we can make a clean comparison between what the client said versus what the server received. Okay, so starting to dig down into a little bit of like MVC semantics and stuff here. So in MVC, as I mentioned, we have like controllers and we have actions and we have filters and views and all these different bits and pieces. And so we're like, well, and this was part of this education problem that we have. We're trying to educate people as to how all this comes together. And so what we actually did here is we've pulled out all of those filters that ran in this particular, for this particular request, plus all the actions, and kind of ordered them so you can actually see them in plain daylight. Okay. So right off the bat here, we can see that the first thing to run is on authorization, okay, on the home controller. Okay, so that's our entry point. We then saw that on executing filter ran, okay, followed by the action itself versus followed by the executed, okay, then we have the result, okay, executing, and we'll see further down the executed, okay, version of that, okay, so we can actually see where are these things running. And again, maybe the order of the filters isn't something that you'd worry about on a day-to-day basis, okay, but if you're running into some sorts of problems with them, trust me, you worry about that. The other thing that we're picking up here, okay, is having a look at what is a child action. So we can automatically see that, hey, this is kind of the root of our controller here versus these are child actions that are occurring. And the other thing that we can start picking up is timings. Okay, now Glimpse gets sponsored, and this is, I did mention before that everything that you're seeing today is 100% free, okay, and 100% open source, okay? And Glimpse is only made possible by the contribution from the community, okay, of, you know, a couple of hundred developers, including myself and Nick, that are kind of like the lights have switched and said, yeah, this is the way we want to be thinking about things and we want to work with things, okay, and have come up with what you're seeing today, okay? And one of the companies that we actually get sponsored by, okay, and that allows us to work on this on a day-by-day basis is Redgate, and they have different profiling tools. But when it comes to profiling, it's a little bit of a black art to try and figure out, you know, where is this stuff actually going wrong. And right off the bat, Glimpse is able to give you a pretty good indication of where are your problems probably going to lie. Okay, so when you open up something like, you know, Ant's Profile or any other different profiling tools, okay, you have a place to start narrowing down in on. So out of everything that's here, where do you think you'd start if performance was a problem on this page? Okay, so we're seeing that right off the bat. Some of the other different bits and pieces that we can get to is routing information. Okay, so this is a particularly contrived example of how routes would actually look, because this is a test application we use for ourselves. But here, we're actually seeing all the routes that are in our system, okay, what the URL is, okay, what the pattern that we've set up, okay, what the name was for them, okay, the different data that's set up for those, okay, the different constraints that are available, okay, and whether or not they matched. Now again, because my resolution is particularly wonky here, we're not seeing it as nicely as it would be normally, okay, but as we come down, we can actually have a look that, right, this is the action that was actually matched. This is the route, sorry, that was actually matched. And we can see that by default, okay, the controller value was set to home and the action was set to index, okay, and that's what was actually picked up. Whereas if we go to rock, for instance, we can see that the default was home, but was matched was store, okay, and likewise with browse. Okay. So we're starting to get into, okay, well, how is that route actually working? And we can also actually see how the constraints work, okay? So we can have a look over here, and this is part of the contrived example here, we can see that this pattern is exactly the same as the one down below, okay? Now, this basically says that, right, the pattern matching, like the high-level algorithm that MVC has inside its, in the box, okay, we'll go, right, we match this. Now, when we match this, the next thing we look at is constraints, okay? If they're present, guess what? Constraints are present. Now, these ones are particularly simple. The constraint is just home and test, okay? Which neither of these constraints passed, okay? Hence, it failed, and then that's why we moved on to the next one. Okay, but we can actually see that that one might have actually, those constraints might have actually passed, okay? We would see true there, but false there, okay? So we can start seeing, well, why didn't that particular, the constraints pass or whatever else? We can also see how much time we're spending on the different route resolutions. As you can see here, it's virtually negligible, but maybe you've got a route that's particularly underperforming, okay? And you're able to dive in and actually see why that's the case. Another one of the tabs here that's particularly interesting is the route, the views tab, okay? And this one is interesting, again, that's a little quirky due to the resolution. But one of the interesting things here is start diving into why the routes, different views were actually matched in the way they were matched, okay? So here, we can actually have a look that first, we had a look in the web forms view engine, okay, for the view browse, okay, and we looked in cache, and it wasn't found, okay, not in cache. We then went to the Razor view engine, okay, still looking for browse, checking cache, it wasn't present, okay. And then we came back to the web forms view engine again, looking for browse, and we looked onto disk, okay, and these are the places on disk that we actually looked, okay, and it wasn't matched on any of those different locations. Eventually we came back to the Razor View Engine, okay, and we actually found it, and here's the some of the information that we passed through for like model binding types and all that sort of stuff. Okay. So right away, one of the pieces of information that we get is that, at least by default, okay, the Web Forms View Engine and the Razor View Engine are both registered, okay. So not that that's a major problem, okay, because MVC does some optimizations once you actually do like a release build, okay. But right away we can actually see, well, we're never using Web Forms at all. Why have that in the pipeline at all anyway? Okay, so let's remove that, okay, and you just see Razor going down the page. Okay. The last one that I want to show off at this point, okay, is Trace. So who has done Web Forms development in the past? Have we got many Web Forms developers? Okay, cool. So do you remember like the trace.axd page? Yeah? Okay, cool. So the trace.axd page was basically a separate page you could go to, or you can configure it to dump out at the bottom of your page, okay, where you get a whole bunch of trace information, like if you used, I think it was something like this.trace or .write or something like that, you actually get out a bunch of information. Glimpse actually taps into the various trace writers, okay, within the system, so we're actually seeing, okay, all the trace information that we have. Okay, now in this example it's not very interesting, okay, again it's more for test. But we're actually seeing that come out. Now, if you already have something like log4net or nlog or something like that set up within your application, you could actually set it up to output instead of to a file or to a database or whatever else. You could set it up to output to TraceWriter, okay, and Glimpse would automatically pick it up, okay. And that's when we're starting to get just the trace information for this particular page, okay, which makes trying to debug much easier, okay. And also in this, what we start to have a look at is the SQL tab, okay? So here, we're starting to pick up all the different SQL connections and commands that happen to make this page possible. So right off the bat, you can see we've had 7 connections, 16 queries, 2 transactions, a total of 19 milliseconds, and the connection was open for 20. Okay? And so here, we start to realize different things. So one, we've got a lot of connections going on. Maybe we could consolidate those, okay, do some connection pooling a little bit more efficiently, or passing connections around. We can also see that we've got 2 transactions, great. And we can also see that the amount of time that the connection was actually open versus the amount of time that we executed wasn't too much, okay? But you might actually see that this number might be up like 200 milliseconds, okay? This is still only 19, okay? And in that case, you might go, well, might be able to close the connection a bit earlier. Okay, now there's sometimes valid reasons for that, but at least we're putting the information in your hand so you can actually see, well, this is what I want to be doing, okay? Sometimes you might not be. And then after we go down, when we actually want to dive into the details, we can have a look and actually see, well, these are the commands per connection. So we've got, connection 1, and we see the duration of this connection is 7 milliseconds, okay? And the duration of the command is actually 1.4, so pretty quick, okay, as we would expect because it's all local. And we can actually see the SQL that actually executed. Again, when we've got more space, all of this lays out a bit nicer. We can also see when transaction boundaries opened and closed. So we can see, right, here the transaction started, here it finished, these are the things that were in that transaction. On this one, being selects, not a big deal, okay, but if you're doing updates, all of that would look as you'd expect. Okay, and here we can actually see that a transaction was started, okay, but it was never committed. Okay, so we closed the transaction, okay, but we didn't actually commit it. Okay, trying to trace down those sorts of bugs, okay, is really painful. Maybe you've got a condition on which you want to commit or not commit or whatever else, and you're trying to figure out why didn't that data write, okay, or something like this. Okay, we can actually dive in and start pulling out this information for you. We can also tell you, was it async? So, with, .NET 4.5 and, future releases and all this sort of stuff, using EF or even raw ADO to do async queries is becoming easier and easier, okay? So we can actually see as we're rolling those changes through our system, which queries are still not rolled over yet or whatever else. So, as you would have seen, there's a fair bit of timing information as we go through these tabs that we're pulling out. Okay, and we were kind of thinking, well, how do we actually bring this together to be a bit of a better story? okay? And we decided to create this timeline tab, okay? So as we can see from this timeline tab, it looks a little bit like timelines you might have seen from like Chrome developer tools or different things like that. But what we're actually getting into, okay, is seeing the detail of our different of this request. Okay? So we can see that here we had a connection open, and this is when the command was executed. So technically, you could look just by seeing that. Well, maybe this one was open for a little bit more than what we actually needed it to be. Whereas this one, we execute all these different commands, so that one was on the money in terms of duration. We can also see that the controller home index actually encapsulated the majority of those different connections and commands that we were doing. Okay, versus the views as they started to render. Okay, we had child views as we were running down. Okay, you can get all this and see all this in filters and all sorts of different things. Zoom in on the different parts of the timeline if you're interested in something specific. Okay, as you're going along. Okay, and Glimpse is more than happy at giving you that information. Okay, so we kind of stretch the timeline here. Okay, the other thing that we can quickly do here is maybe seeing the timeline like that isn't your style. Again, you prefer more of a table layout. You can go and you can switch views and you can see that sort of information. Does this kind of resonate with kind of things that you'd like to see from your tools and stuff like that? Good, okay, we're on the right track. One of the last things that I want to show is that we were kind of in the position where we're like, okay, we've got all of this sort of information. And one of the background stories of Glimpse is that who's ever heard of Mix, the conference? Okay, it used to be held in Las Vegas. You know, they don't have it anymore. But the last one that was run, a guy called John Popper, okay, now works for Disney, used to work for Microsoft, ran what was called an open source fest. Okay, this is part of the history of how Glimpse came out. And Nick and I one day, you know, I'd like to say we were drunk, but we weren't, decided that we would enter, okay, and the next day, without any code or anything, we found out that we got accepted, and then it was like, oh shit, okay? And so we had 5 weeks to come up with something that we could actually show, you know, a whole community of our peers, okay, otherwise we would look like fools. So we're like, okay, well, we better put something together. So I remember being in Las Vegas, you know, shaking just before the event, and I said to Nick, how about we make a change, okay? And he was like, why? We're not making any changes. It's done. We literally just finished like 5 minutes before that, and we had like an hour or something before the event. And I was like, all of this information that we've been seeing is pretty much exactly the same for any Ajax request that occurred. Okay, so an Ajax request, even though the user didn't click like a hyperlink and the browser went away and came back, okay, it still went to the server. Okay, there was still activity on the client. Still went to the server still ran its server pipeline, which is exactly the same, whether it's a root request, let's say, versus an Ajax request, and we'd still have all this information. So we quickly put together this Ajax tab, okay, which is basically Glimpse in the background is collecting the requests and storing the requests as we go along, just storing them in memory. And on this page, we actually have a news ticker down here, okay? And so as those as that news ticker ticks away, it's going polling the server, pulling back different information. Pretty simple example of like an Ajax request. So as we can see here, we're getting news, we're getting gets, there's the 200s, we can see how long they went for and when they go. Brilliant. Where the real value comes in is when we can actually choose to inspect one of these. Okay, so I can pick any one of these, right, okay, this one because it was slower than all the rest. I want to figure out why. And can you see all these other tabs pulsing? Okay, they're all pulsed. All of those tabs are actually updated. Okay, and we can actually see that by having a look at this. Remember before we were looking at you know, home index. Okay, now we're looking at home news. And we can actually see the execution pipeline of that Ajax request. Okay, likewise, if we go to the timeline tab, okay, we can actually see that it's updated. Okay, and it's a fair bit simpler than what its counterpart was, okay, on the other page, okay, with all the SQL connections, okay? So we're actually seeing that, and here it's actually telling us we're looking at an Ajax request and we're down, and at any point I can choose to go back, okay, now we're looking at the origin request again. And at any point you can see all those pulsing telling you that we've updated. At any point I can come back and go, well, right, I want to have a look on this one, okay, and we might choose to go and have a look at, you know, the session information for that. Okay, and so here we're going in and looking at that session information. So who thinks that's cool? Okay, the fact that we can start diving into that. Cool. Okay, we're doing our job. So we threw that in at the last second, and then literally as we were walking down the corridor, I said to Nick, I don't think that we're going to be first. And he's like, now what are you doing? Okay, you'll see, he's got this thing that he does, you'll see in a bit. Okay, and I was like, wouldn't it be cool? Okay, and I got really excited. I tend to get a little excited, you can verify this later. But I was like, I can make clips for the mobile. Okay, there's this whole responsive thing. Mind you, this was like 2011, so it was like cool to be excited about responsive design in 2011. And I was like, I can make this panel fit in here. And he was like, you're an idiot, okay? Okay, you'll see, he does this. Okay, and so that idea, okay, might have been, a bit foolish, okay, but it led to the fact and the realization, okay, that wouldn't it be cool if you could get Glimpse or get information that Glimpse collects from requests that you're doing on your mobile phone. So who does any mobile development for the companies or in their spare time or stuff like that? Okay, cool. Maybe a third of the room. So what you can actually do is you can set Glimpse up and actually follow other requests. Okay, so looks similar-ish, okay, to the Ajax tab, except we've got like a grouping over here. We're actually seeing Chrome 25 inspect, okay, and we're looking at Chrome and these are the requests. Now, at the moment, we're seeing only news tickers, okay, because that's all the last requests that I've made. But as we navigate around, you'll see that different requests pop up, okay, into the store here. And at any time, I can go back and click on one of these and actually have a look. Okay, well, what was the execution pipeline for store? Okay, but let's take routes. I can actually see cool store index. That's what I'd expect to see for that URL that I actually hit. But what we can actually do is, if I open up a mobile phone, and because of the internet here it's a little funny, but I'm just going to use a different browser. Okay, so if I go to the same page, let's open. Okay, did you see IE just pop open? Okay, and so what we're actually getting, okay, is IE's, Glimpse, sorry, is actually picking up different requests that this other browser is making. Now this would work, okay, I know I'm asking you to stretch a little bit, but this works whether you're doing it on a mobile phone or wherever, a tablet, whatever you happen to be doing. Okay, and I can actually click inspect on that one, and then as I come back here, okay, if I navigate around to any of the different pages, okay, we're actually seeing those requests come in real time. Okay, and I can click again on any one of those and we'll see the requests for those. Now, that led to another scenario which we can actually do, which is rather cool, is that what if we could turn Glimpse on in a write-only capacity? Okay, so what I mean by that is we're capturing information, writing information at the moment, and we're also reading information. We're seeing Glimpse on the panel here. Okay, what if we could actually set Glimpse up in write-only, so if there's this other browser, you wouldn't actually see Glimpse down the bottom, okay? But what if you could make it so you wouldn't see Glimpse, but Glimpse would actually be running, okay? So you might have this client in Turkey who's got this issue. You can click a button on their account somewhere, depending on how you set it up with security, because security isn't just on or off. It might be, on, so you can read and write, off, and you would actually see them pop up over here. And we can actually follow them around in real time, watching their navigations as they're moving about. Okay, so that was like, okay, and it's pretty cool when you see this stuff working for real. The last thing that I want to show you, okay, before we hand over to Nick, so we can do the second part, or before the break actually, is we're kind of like, well, all this information is fantastic. Okay, it's great that I can move around and do whatever else. But, wouldn't it be good if we could pull out all the nuggets of information? So there's various bits and pieces of information throughout the different tabs. And we're kind of like, wouldn't it be fantastic if we could have these? And so we're like, yeah, it would. Okay. And then we're like, well, who's going to do that? And then we're like, well, we're the people who work on this, so we'll do it. Okay, cool. Let's do it. And so what we came up with is this thing called HUD, okay, which is heads-up display. So what heads-up display does is adds these portions to the bottom of your page Okay, so we can actually see, okay, what pieces of information occurred or what these nuggets are as we're navigating around. So you actually see these update in real time, okay, or follows along with us as we're navigating around. Okay, so you might have a policy that, you know, no request is to go over a second, so Glimpse would automatically be able to flag that for you, okay, when that happens. Okay, and you'll be able to see that. We can also see where our time was spent on the Y of the server versus the client. So we can actually see here in terms of optimizations that the majority of our time is actually spent on the client. Okay, so server's doing all right. And we can actually mouse over any of these and dive in and get a little bit more detail. Here we'd see the server and the user if they're logged on. And that one's not particularly interesting, but this next one will be, okay, where we can actually pull out for the default action and view how long they took. And again, we can see that the view is where we spent the majority of our time on the server. We can confirm what controller and action. So if I go to home, we'll actually see those update to home index. And we can see, you know, what's happening with our query. So 17 milliseconds, 16 commands. But we can also mouse over these and start to dive down into, well, what's, you know, what time zone are we set up on, what's our server time, our view versus our rendering versus action, total server time, the controller in action, queries, connections, okay, all this is just a mouse hover away. And we can also see kind of what's the nesting of our controls here. So we can see, right, we've got controller, we've got render, okay, and then we've got these other controllers. This one is where all of our queries happened. Okay, 14 queries that took 16 milliseconds. These ones, you know, on these other controllers, relatively throw away. So again, at a kind of glance, we can start to see where our problems are and start narrowing down. Okay, and starting using, you know, other debugging like performance tools or profiling tools to narrow down on the nitty-gritty there. So this is the majority of what I wanted to cover today. Okay. Oh, one thing. The other thing that we get, and I'll just quickly show you this, is that when you're on Ajax pages, this other one, they might have been sticking away here. You'll see these pop in as they occur, okay, and we can actually mouse over and get access to these. All these are the same because it's polling. We can actually see the duration, the size of the payload, okay, the content type, when it actually occurred, you know, you get 200, okay. So all the stuff you typically expect. And from here, if I clicked on one of these, you'd go through and it would open up Glimpse at that particular request. So that's about it. Okay, we could go into more detail on some of the reasons why all of this works. Okay, and why it's good. But I wanted to leave a couple of minutes for questions before we wind up. Does anyone have anything off the top of their head? Well, I'll ask a question first. Who thinks this is useful? You know what we're seeing. Okay, cool. Has anyone actually used Glimpse before? Who's got it already installed on their application? Okay, cool. Hopefully we've learned some things. I don't know, maybe. So I challenge all of you to go away. Okay, install it. Okay, give it a go. See what you think. Okay, and we've got big changes coming to. We're working on V2 at the moment, which have got some pretty cool ideas for what we can bring to the table. Okay, and best of all, as I mentioned, all of this is free and open source. Okay, so if you do want to get involved in a project, but you've just been trying to think of one to do, yeah, we can help you out and get you started. I think I saw a question over there.
Yeah, are there any SharePoint ones?
Great question. Not at the moment. We are backwards compatible in terms of .NET back to 3.5, and the only reason we do that is we're thinking that maybe someday someone might do something for SharePoint. Okay, so not at the moment. Okay, but if you'd like to contribute, we'd be more than happy to take it in. Any other questions? Yes.
If our server makes like API calls to a WCF service or a web API service also on localhost, will it track into those?
No, not at the moment. So part of the vision of what we want to do with Glimpse, and this is part of what will be better in V2, is that imagine an environment where you've got a very thin web server. Okay, and when I say thin web server, I mean it doesn't do much logic. Similar scenario to you. So you're doing API calls like WCF, whatever, to maybe a billing service, order service, all these different bits and pieces, and they're all REST, okay, and they're all HTTP, and everyone's in love and having fun. wouldn't it be fantastic if we could run Glimpse on each of those different servers, okay, and start collecting payloads for all those sub-requests, okay? Then we can correlate them all together, and in Glimpse, okay, you can actually see the complete diagnostics picture, okay, from the point the client clicked the button all the way to the server, to all the sub-servers that happen, and all the way back, okay? And the other part of that is, you might be thinking, well, yeah, I've got .NET all the way through my shop, and I've got some PHP servers or Node servers or whatever else. The great thing with Glimpse is that we've actually got prototype implementations that we're working on different platforms. Yeah. So imagine the same thing, same infrastructure in place and whatever else, okay, for Node, for PHP and whatever else. So if you've got a heterogeneous environment as opposed to a homogeneous environment, we can start pulling this all together. Okay, so that's where we're moving towards, okay, and that's what we really want to do. Okay, some of those challenges, okay, and the reason we haven't done more with it today is around UX, and we think we've kind of nailed some of that in what we're working on with V2, but we're getting there. So one more question here, did I? Yeah.
What sort of performance impact should Glimpse have?
Great question. So normal profilers tap into the profiling APIs. Okay, tapping into the profile APIs is like, imagine, here in Scotland we make things big, okay? You don't do things by halves. So imagine you, instead of like a fire hose at the end of the street, instead of being like this big, it was like this big, okay? And this fire hose, when you turn on the profiling APIs, it's like turning on a fire hose this big. And that's where we get like the deal that like when we profile things, we get bad performance. With the way that Glimpse does things, we try to be a little clever, okay? And instead of tapping into the profiling APIs, we tap into the different extension points that the frameworks themselves have, okay? So we're tapping into points that they already have, okay, that they're already publishing information out on, or that we can wrap up or whatever else. So typically we only add like maybe 1 or 2 frames to the stack, okay? So we're talking negligible performance. The majority of our performance cost actually comes from serializing the data down to the client. Okay, and that's not done in the request that the user makes to get this page. If we viewed source here, we'd actually see some script tags which go to an external resource. It's when this page loads, we go back to the server saying, please give me the serialized data for support this. That goes back up. At that point, we serialize, so a totally different request, and that's where the majority of our performance cost is. Okay, like 75% when we've profiled these things. And that's JSON.NET. So we figure if JSON.NET is taking 7% of our time, we're probably fairly highly optimized. If you've got any questions, I think we're about to go into a break. Feel free to come up afterwards and ask me questions. We also have Glimpse stickers. Nick will hold them up. They're really cool, okay? And we're wanting to give them away, okay? Not because we don't like them, but because we've got a whole heap printed just for this trip, okay? So we're like, Scotland, we've got to have lots. There'll be lots of developers, they want these things. Okay, so we're like, we're bringing Glimpse to the world, so please come up and get some. And as I said, if you have any other questions, come and see us. Okay, thank you very much.